A 113-year empire that outlasted 2 world wars was erased in a single morning, erased by the one company that swore to save it. More American boats ran on its motors than any rivals. But stay with me. It started with melted ice cream. Picture a Norwegian rowing a Wisconsin lake with ice cream for the girl he loves. By the time you reach the far shore, it's soup, melted. So he builds the machine that puts a motor on every American summer you've known. The 2-stroke snarl, the smell of gas and lake water. He was Ole Evinrude, and you've heard his motors but never his name. But one morning in 2020, it was gone. Here's what you weren't told. The shot that killed it wasn't fired that year. It was fired 20 years earlier. Same wound, same mistake, twice. Add a guess. Who do you think pulled the trigger? The market or the man? 5 seconds. Stick with me, because you'll learn why. Honestly, they might have been right. But to know who killed it, you first have to meet the man who built it. A machinist so broke he almost lost the right to his own name. Milwaukee, 1907. A broke Norwegian machinist bends over a workbench that smells of oil and cut metal, building a motor small enough to clamp onto the back of a rowboat. His name is Ole Evinrude, a young immigrant with grease under his nails and far more skill than money. And the reason he's out here betting his livelihood on this strange little machine comes down to a dish of melted ice cream. The story goes like this. One blazing summer afternoon, Ole rows all the way across Okauchee Lake to bring Bess, the woman he's engaged to, ice cream on the far shore. By the time he lands, it's warm soup. Most men shrug and eat it. But Ole has almost nothing to his name and a fiancée to marry. So instead of eating it, he goes home and starts building the thing that would row the boat for you. So picture what he makes. 1.5 horsepower, 62 pounds of iron. Slow enough that a man walking the shoreline could keep pace. It doesn't look like the birth of anything. Honestly, nothing about it looks like the future. But clamp it to a wooden hull, pull the cord, and suddenly you don't need oars or muscle or a rich man's inboard yacht. The whole lake opens up to anyone who owns a boat. That's the magic almost nobody saw coming. Ole didn't build the fastest thing on the water. He built the motor that put an engine on the back of every American weekend. By 1909, they can't make them fast enough. Fresh varnish, old gasoline, that low rumble, drifting across a Saturday lake. For 3 generations, that sound was summer, and half of North America has a photo with an Evinrude idling in the background. Which leaves you with one question. How does one man's garage motor, 1.5 horsepower, 62 pounds, barely faster than a walk, become an empire that owns most of America's water? Because it did. By the 1930s, the motor from that little rowboat dominated the water in America, and empires that big only ever fall one way, from the inside. Picture 1936. The 2 most feared names in outboard motors stop trying to bury each other, and they merge. 2 companies that spent a decade trying to bankrupt each other, suddenly shaking hands. Why? Take a second, because whoever stopped the war would own every lake in America. Johnson, the fierce rival Ole had battled for years, now broke from the Depression, folds into the Outboard Marine Corporation, the group Ole's old company had helped set up 7 years before. But you'd never guess who stitched it together. He wasn't even a boatman. Stephen Briggs, the industrialist who'd helped organize OMC back in 1929, saw exactly what you'd see. Stop the war, and you own the water. So they did. And if you kept a boat anywhere in the world, Ralph was about to reach you. Ole's heir Ralph Evinrude took the wheel, and under him that little Milwaukee shop became a worldwide machine. Ralph pushed those motors off America's lakes and onto rivers and coastlines across the world. The Johnson Seahorse turned into the sound of the American summer, that ripping 2-stroke snarl off the back of every dock, gasoline and lake water and heat. If your family kept a boat on a lake in those years, the odds say a seahorse hung off the transom. So the money bought engineers, and the engineers built hardware that turned into legend. 1958. The die-cast 50-horse, light, brutal, years ahead of anything else on the water. And the Starflight, dressed in chrome and fins like a 79 Cadillac, shoved off a dock. You didn't just hear one start. You felt it in your chest, all chrome and blue smoke and promise. These weren't tools, they were jewelry that happened to move a boat. Here's the fact everyone forgets. One company now sold more outboard motors in America than anyone else. From a 1.5-horse clamped to a rowboat, the one that carried melting ice cream across a Wisconsin lake, to owning most of the water on the continent. That's the empire Ole built. But an empire that big draws knives. One man refused to kneel, and you would not have wanted to be in his sights. Karl Kiekhaefer, a ferocious, obsessive engineer who ran his Mercury outboards like a war campaign and tested them in secret. For decades he clawed at OMC's crown with everything he had, and still nothing Mercury did could knock it off the top. So what threatens a giant that owns the water, beats every rival, and prints money for 3 straight decades? Not a competitor, a law. Washington passed a rule that would force almost every engine Evinrude built off the market, and the only fix on the table came from a German company almost nobody had heard of. You think a rival killed Evinrude? It wasn't. Not Mercury, not Yamaha. The threat was 3 letters: EPA. By the mid-1990s, the Clean Air Act comes for you. You run the biggest outboard empire on Earth, the name on more American transoms than any rival, and Washington just set a deadline that would force almost every engine you build off the market. The rule hit the whole industry. Clean up your new engines by 2006 or stop selling them. They gave you exactly one safe way out. You've got 5 seconds. What is it? The 4-stroke. Heavier, pricier, already eating your market. And OMC refused it. Here's why you loved that engine. A 2-stroke fires on every turn of the crank. Light, cheap, and it snarls. But to breathe, it lets fresh fuel and spent exhaust share the cylinder for a heartbeat. So raw gasoline and oil blow straight out the back, unburned, into the lake. One old outboard could outpollute a parking lot of cars. That's the engine Washington was phasing out. So OMC made a bet the whole industry called insane. Instead of the 4-stroke, its leadership reached for a company almost nobody in America had heard of. Ficht, a small German firm with one radical patent: direct injection. Don't let the fuel escape. Spray it straight into the cylinder after the exhaust port slams shut. Clean 2-stroke power. 4-stroke emissions, half the weight. On paper, salvation. Why bet the empire? 100-year name. The biggest fleet on the water, on an untested idea from a garage in Germany. Hold that question. The answer is why the same wound reopens, 20 years later. Ficht launched in 1997 to headlines. Then the engines went out on the water. At low speed, trolling, they misfired. Coughing, stalling, flooding. Under load, the failure turned violent. The injectors ran lean, the cylinders ran hot, and pistons came apart at the crown. Picture it, you're a mile out, kids aboard, and the engine you trusted just grenades itself. The recalls started, the lawsuits followed. Dealers who'd sold Evinrude since their fathers ran the counter watched customers walk to Yamaha and never come back. The German fix didn't save them. Engines came apart on the water, and 3 days before Christmas 2000, the company that put America on the lake filed for bankruptcy. A Chicago courtroom. Bankruptable Company. December 22, 2000. Its last CEO had already walked out months before, so it fell to the men left holding the wreckage to sign. OMC files Chapter 11. 1 page, 3 days before Christmas, in a nearly empty room. A 113-year empire, dead by Christmas. Guess how many jobs the collapse took in the end? 7,000. By the time the lawyers filed, you already knew why. Fitch wasn't the gamble they wanted. It was the only chip they had left. Washington's emissions law was phasing their old 2-stroke line out of the market, and going 4-stroke meant retooling every plant they owned. They didn't have the cash for that, so they reached for the cheap miracle instead, and the miracle came apart on the water. Sit with what that sentence means. The company Ole built after a dish of ice cream melted on that Wisconsin lake, the company that outlived 2 world wars and the Great Depression, couldn't outlive its own engine. The papers were signed, and before the collapse was over, 7,000 paychecks had stopped. Picture the machinist in Waukegan, who'd bolted these motors together for 30 years, cleaning out his locker while his kids were still writing letters to Santa. You could hear the plant go quiet, for good. But a brand this big doesn't simply die. It gets carved up. The lawyers split the corpse in 2. Ole's outboard motors, the ones that put America on the lake, went one way. The boats got sold to a rival named Genmar, auctioned off like furniture at an estate sale. An entire industry, one America built into an empire, starting in a Milwaukee garage, one broke immigrant at a time, stopped being American that winter. The country that taught the world to clamp a motor on the back of a rowboat had just lost the company that started all of it. And the strangest part? Somebody wanted the wreckage. While the presses in Waukegan were still cooling and the workers stood stunned in the parking lot, a buyer was already circling, one nobody in the marine business ever saw coming. The name sold to Bombardier, the Canadian snowmobile giant, for pennies on the dollar. A company that swore, on the record, it would make Evinrude great again. A snowmobile company just paid pennies for a brand that blew its own pistons apart on the water. Genius, or insane. You've got 5 seconds. His name is José Boisjoli, a Quebec engineer who would come to run BRP, the company spun out of Bombardier's recreational arm, behind Ski-Doo and Sea-Doo. He looked at a dead American legend and saw a bet worth making. That answers who buys a bankrupt, disgraced brand. A man who builds 2-stroke engines for a living and believes he can finish what a German fix started. So he pours in real money, chasing an ending almost too strange to believe. The agency whose emissions law cornered Evinrude would one day hand his 2-stroke a medal. And here's the part that should stun you. Watch what Boisjoli does in 2004. He brings back the E-TEC, the exact tech that blew Fit the part, except this time it works. Direct injection, no oil changes, no spark plug fouling. 3 years between services. The engine that had killed the company, reborn as the engine that might save it. Then the trophies start. The EPA hands E-TEC its Clean Air Technology Excellence Award. The same agency, the same emissions law that nearly outlawed the 2-stroke, now pinning a medal on it. By 2014, BRP goes further. The E-TEC G2. Angular, aggressive, rigged in colors no outboard had ever worn. Steering and trim built inside the engine. It looks like nothing else on the transom. And by 2019, when the magazines put it on the dynamometer, the numbers come back almost impossible. Testers call it the most fuel-efficient, cleanest burning outboard ever built. Not the cleanest 2-stroke, the cleanest, period. Think about that. The little 1.5 horse motor Ole, clamped to a rowboat, had become the most advanced outboard on Earth. Everything the empire ever promised. The power, the cleanliness, the mechanical wizardry, BRP had finally delivered it. And the customers walked away anyway. Why would anyone turn down the best engine on the water? Nobody at BRP could say. The showrooms had the trophies, the colors, the impossible numbers, and one by one, the buyers kept walking past them. So sit with the cruelty of it. They built the cleanest outboard ever tested, and then they made the exact same bet that killed the company the first time, 20 years, almost to the season, later. May 27th, 2020. The email lands in Sturtevant, Wisconsin at the worst possible moment. A plant already half empty for the pandemic, and it says the one thing nobody clocking in that morning expected to read. Evinrude is finished. Not paused, finished. 387 jobs in that Wisconsin town, gone by lunch. 650 worldwide. The same scene as Waukegan, 20 years earlier, a machinist cleaning out a locker, except this time there was no rival circling the wreckage. This time nobody wanted it. The reason BRP gave you was COVID, the pandemic. a once-in-a-century virus that just happened to land on a 113-year-old company at exactly the wrong hour. Convenient, but sit with it a second, because that's the cover story, not the cause. COVID didn't kill Evinrude. COVID pulled a trigger that had been cocked for 20 years. Here's the shot, and it's the same shot fired twice. In 2000, OMC bet everything on Fitch two-stroke direct injection against a market drifting to four-stroke, and the engines came apart on the water. In 2020, BRP bet everything on E-TEC two-stroke direct injection against a market that had already gone four-stroke. Same wound, same cylinder, 20 years, almost to the season, apart. And here's why buyers walked past the cleanest outboard ever tested. By 2020, they'd already decided. They wanted quiet. They wanted no oil to mix, no smoke off the transom, the four-stroke badge everybody else on the lake was running, a Mercury, a Yamaha. Walk into a dealership, and the salesman would tell you straight. Customers wanted a four-stroke, and no chart full of Boisjoli's numbers could talk them out of it. His engine was better on every measure that mattered on paper, and it lost anyway, to a preference no dynamometer could read. Which means the man who fired the shot has a name, and you already know it, Jose Boisjoli, the Quebec engineer who bought the corpse, poured in a fortune, built the finest two-stroke on earth, and then, on a Wednesday in May, shut it in a single sentence. So was Evinrude doomed the day it first bet on the two-stroke? Or could anyone, at any point in that century, have steered it off the rock? Here's the part that stings. The man who pulled the trigger may not be the villain of this story. Killing Evinrude might have been the only honest thing anyone had done in 20 years. They were right to end it. I know how that lands after everything you just watched, but look at the numbers. By 2019, that last G2 was the cleanest, most efficient outboard popular mechanics had ever tested. Brilliant engineering, but almost nobody wanted it. By the end, Evinrude was selling into a market that had stopped listening. The lakes had already voted, and they voted four-stroke. Quiet, no oil to mix, the smell of nothing at all. That's the cruel part. What died wasn't a bad engine. It was a whole language. The blue haze off the transom on a July morning. The rasp you could hear across the water before you ever saw the boat. For a lot of you, that sound is your father's hand on the throttle. The first boat he ever let you steer. Varnish, old gasoline, and summer, gone. Because the thing that made that smell was the same thing poisoning the water under the hull. So could anyone have saved it? Honestly, no. Not on two-stroke. Ole rode across Okaushie Lake, chasing melting ice cream, because he wanted to be faster than his own world. 113 years later, the world got faster than Evinrude. Same wound, twice. They kept betting on the engine that felt like home instead of the one the customer had already chosen. When the deal finally closed, the outboards went to Mercury, the same rival that spent the 50s circling with a knife to keep the Alumacrafts and Manitus running. The blue and white script came off the cowlings for good. The name went quiet. But quiet isn't dark. The Sturtevant plant never shut off its lights. Behind blacked-out windows, they're still building something, a machine they'll only call Project Ghost. And that is a story for another day.